Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I work at one of those huge Fortune 50 companies that everyone knows. The kind with fancy office buildings and executives who fly around in private jets while the rest of us worry about meeting quotas. Speaking of quotas, that's where this whole mess started. In my department, we're all senior level professionals. Every single one of us works with the top executives at other Fortune 500 companies as trusted advisors. We're the ones who handle the complex partner relationships that bring in most of the company's revenue. None of us could be replaced by some fresh college graduate, which is exactly what management tries to do whenever they want to cut costs. For years, the rule was simple. If you fell below 70% of your sales quota, you risked being put on a performance review plan. Everyone knows that getting put on a performance review plan is basically a death sentence for your career. Either you get fired for failing the plan, or you're first on the chopping block when layoffs come around. About 2 months ago, my boss was summoned to a rare in-person 2-day seminar with the general manager of sales for the Americas and several senior human resources managers. The first day was all sunshine and rainbows, presentations about how important our division was to the company's strategy, how we were going to increase partner program revenue from 60% to 85%, and how 75% of new growth would come through our partner channels. They kept emphasizing how they were relying on our division and our skilled staff to deliver these ambitious goals. Then came day 2. In the afternoon, they told us their brilliant new plan. Technical sellers would now need to maintain 80% attainment per year, backdated 2 years. My boss immediately went into what I call his just asking questions mode. My boss asked for clarification, wanting to confirm if someone who had hit 100% attainment last year, as 75% of our team had, but only 79% the previous year, would be put on a performance review plan. The human resources representative said that yes, that's exactly how it would work. My boss then asked if there were any exceptions to this rule. The general manager said that everyone must be a top performer, with absolutely no exceptions allowed. At this point, my boss started gathering his things. When the general manager asked why he needed to leave when there was more to cover, my boss explained that based on the metrics and no exceptions rule, he needed to prepare performance review plans for his entire team and start the open headcount process to hire replacements for everyone. The general manager looked bewildered, trying to process what he was hearing. Then something amazing happened. Most of the other managers in the room said they needed to leave as well to prepare performance review plans for all their people and submit open headcount requests. My boss pointed out that a quick calculation showed about 80% of our entire division would end up on performance review plans. Given the failure rate of these plans, that meant roughly 70% of the team would be fired, 10% would be laid off, and only 20% would remain. And this was supposed to be the division leading the company's growth strategy. He also explained that personnel retention and reduced turnover were part of the roll-up objectives as well as attainment targets for his reports. That meant he would be put on a performance review plan too, as would his manager and her manager all the way up the chain, with no exceptions. The meeting quickly fell apart after that. The general manager said they weren't implementing this immediately but in a few months. Over the next 2 months, there were countless online meetings, questions asked, data pulled from human resources systems, and discussions with human resources and the legal department, who became extremely interested in this plan once they heard about it. It all culminated in a meeting this past Monday, where they revealed the revised plan. Suddenly, there was a new exceptions policy in place, insisted upon by the legal department. Gone was the vague, put together a package to be evaluated for an optional exception process. And now there were formal exception categories covering situations like taking family leave or medical short-term disability in the last 3 years, being moved between departments or job titles, having a non-quota designation, quota plans changing significantly, or metrics with no previous history. There were 10 or 12 categories in total, depending on how you counted the overlaps. And an exception reset the timer to the next calendar year. So if someone qualified for an exception in January, they were off the hook until the next January. Everyone in our division now qualified for at least one of these exceptions. Later, we found out that human resources had never actually analyzed how many people would be impacted in our specific division. They had run the numbers company-wide across 100,000 plus quota-carrying employees and concluded that only 11% would end up on performance review plans. They never bothered to check department by department. When legal discovered they were backdating requirements by 2 years, they went ballistic. They were even more furious when they realized there were no exceptions for federally protected leave like family or medical disability. I've got to hand it to my boss. He could have just nodded along with that ridiculous plan to avoid rocking the boat. Instead, he showed them exactly what would happen if they followed through with their no exceptions policy. He protected our entire team by forcing them to face the absurdity of their own rules. I wanted to live peacefully in the house I worked hard to buy. I'm a military veteran who served 2 tours overseas. After leaving the service, I saved every penny for 5 years to buy a modest home on the outskirts of town. The property wasn't fancy, but it was mine. A small 3-bedroom on a decent-sized lot with no mortgage. The neighborhood was mostly quiet except for one thing: the homeowners association that controlled most of the surrounding streets. When I purchased my house, it was because it wasn't part of their jurisdiction. My realtor made sure of that before I signed any papers. The property had been grandfathered out of the HOA's control when the previous owner refused to join decades ago. For the first few months, everything was fine. I kept my yard maintained but didn't stress about having the greenest lawn or the most manicured hedges. I painted my front door a dark blue instead of the HOA-mandated beige. I even put up a small American flag near my porch, apparently against HOA rules, though it didn't apply to me. That's when the letters started. At first, they were friendly reminders about neighborhood standards. I ignored them. Then came threats of fines, which made me laugh since they had no authority over my property. I called their office once to clarify that my home wasn't part of their association, but the conversation didn't go well. The HOA president told me my house was an eyesore and claimed I was bringing down property values for everyone else. She demanded that I comply with their standards. I explained that my property wasn't part of their HOA, which I had checked before buying. She claimed that everyone in the neighborhood was part of their community and that the previous owner only had a temporary exemption that expired when I bought the house. I told her that's not how property law works and stated I wouldn't sign anything or pay their fees. She threatened that we'll see about that. Last Sunday morning, I was having coffee on my back porch when I noticed movement at the edges of my property. At first, I thought it might be neighborhood kids or maybe a deer, but then I saw them, men in dark uniforms moving through the trees that bordered my backyard. They had guns. My military training kicked in immediately. I went inside, locked my doors, and retrieved my legally owned firearm from my gun safe. I called 911 first, keeping my voice low. I reported to the dispatcher that armed men were surrounding my house and I thought they were trying to break in. I requested officers immediately. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line and said officers were on their way. They asked if I was in a safe location. I replied that I was safe for now, but the men were closing in. I mentioned I was a legal gun owner and would defend myself if necessary. I looked through the blinds and counted 5 men in total. They wore uniforms with HOA security patches. Since when did a homeowners association have armed security? This wasn't normal. This was intimidation. One of them walked to my front door and pounded on it. The security guard shouted for me to open up, saying they were HOA enforcement and needed to speak with me right away. I stayed silent, watching through the peephole as he signaled to the others who were now trespassing on my property, moving toward my house from all sides. The guard yelled that they knew I was inside. He claimed the HOA board had authorized them to take measures to bring my property into compliance. He warned I had one chance to sign the membership agreement. That's when one of them tried the back door handle, jiggling it aggressively. Another one was peering through my kitchen window. This wasn't about lawn height or door color anymore. They were threatening me. The back door glass shattered. That's when I made my decision. I shouted that I was armed and they were trespassing. I told them the police were on their way and demanded they leave my property immediately. The security guard yelled back that they had authority from the HOA and ordered me to put down any weapons and come out with a signed agreement. When the first guard pushed through my broken back door, weapon raised, I had no choice. I fired a warning shot into the ceiling, hoping they'd retreat. Instead, one of them fired toward me, missing by inches and hitting my refrigerator. After that, everything happened in a blur. I returned fire, hitting two of them in the legs. The others fired back and I took cover behind my kitchen island, firing when I had clear shots. By the time police sirens wailed in the distance, 3 of the security guards were wounded, none fatally, but they wouldn't be walking for a while. The other 2 had fled. The aftermath was messy. I was initially detained, but security camera footage from my doorbell and the neighbors across the street confirmed my story. The HOA president and board members were arrested for conspiracy, hiring unlicensed armed security, and orchestrating an armed invasion of my property. I found out later that they'd been trying this intimidation tactic with other non-HOA properties in the area, though never to this extreme. Most people had given in and signed their agreements out of fear. The security guards faced charges too, and several of them turned on the HOA board, testifying about how they'd been told to do whatever necessary to get signatures. I'm still in my house with my blue door and my American flag. The HOA has been dissolved following criminal investigations, and most of my neighbors have thanked me for standing my ground. Turns out a lot of them were tired of the tyranny too. No organization, especially not a homeowners association, has the right to threaten someone with armed force over grass height and door colors. After graduating college, I landed a decent job at a small marketing agency in the city. The pay wasn't amazing, but it was enough to rent a modest 1-bedroom apartment. That was until my landlord decided to raise the rent by 30%, leaving me scrambling for options. That's how I ended up with a roommate. The apartment hunting process was brutal. Either places were way out of my budget or in sketchy neighborhoods. When I saw a listing for a 2-bedroom that was in my price range with utilities included, I jumped at the opportunity. The girl who posted the ad seemed normal enough. She worked as a server at a popular restaurant downtown and kept odd hours, which worked well with my 9-to-5 schedule. We met for coffee, had a brief chat about expectations, and agreed to move in together. The first few weeks were fine. We kept to ourselves, had different schedules, and barely saw each other. But then I started noticing that food I'd bought would mysteriously disappear from the fridge. At first I thought maybe I was just forgetting what I'd eaten. Then one day I bought myself a nice piece of salmon for dinner, put it in the fridge before work, and when I came home it was gone. That's when I knew something was up. I decided to talk to her about it. I asked her if she had eaten the salmon I bought yesterday. She casually admitted that she had, saying she hoped it was okay. She explained that she was hungry after her shift and thought it looked really good. I told her I had been planning to have that for dinner tonight and asked if she could maybe ask before taking my food. She said sorry and promised it wouldn't happen again. But it did happen again, and again, and again. No matter how many times I brought it up, she'd say sorry but continue doing it. I even started labeling my food with my name, but that didn't stop her either. The final straw came when I had a rough day at work. My boss had rejected my designs 3 times, and I was looking forward to coming home to the pasta I'd made the night before. I'd been thinking about those leftovers all day, but when I opened the fridge, the container was empty, with just a few sauce smears left behind. I confronted her again. I asked if she had eaten my pasta leftovers. She said yes and told me it was really good, even suggesting I give her the recipe sometime. I reminded her that I had asked her multiple times not to eat my food without asking and told her I had been really looking forward to those leftovers. She brushed me off, saying it wasn't a big deal, it was just food, that I could always make more. That's when I knew talking with her wasn't going to work. She didn't care about my boundaries or respect my stuff, so I decided to get creative. The next day, I went to the grocery store with a plan. I picked up some premium items I knew she loved: fancy cheese, organic yogurt, and some gourmet chocolate pudding cups. Then I made some changes. I mixed hot ghost pepper sauce into the pudding cups, carefully resealing them so they looked untouched. I sprinkled the cheese with a powdered laxative, and for the yogurt, I mixed in some pureed garlic and anchovy paste. I put everything in the fridge, clearly labeled with my name, and waited. That evening, I heard her come home from her shift. I pretended to be asleep but listened carefully. I heard the fridge open, then close. About 10 minutes later, I heard rapid footsteps to the bathroom, followed by the sound of someone spitting into the sink. I heard her asking what was wrong with the pudding. I smiled and went back to sleep. The next morning, I noticed the bathroom door was shut with the light on. I could hear uncomfortable sounds coming from inside. I made myself breakfast and left for work. When I got home that evening, my food was untouched in the fridge. My roommate was sitting at the kitchen table looking pale. She asked me if I knew if there was something wrong with the food in the fridge. She said she thought she got food poisoning yesterday. I replied that it was strange and that I hadn't touched any of it yet. I suggested that maybe she should stick to her own food if she was worried about getting sick. She looked at me but didn't say anything else. For the next few days, she didn't touch my food. Then, a week later, I caught her looking at my new container of store-bought cookies. I told her that I wouldn't try them if I were her, hinting that she never knew what might be in there. She quickly backed away from the fridge. It's been 3 months since then, and she hasn't touched my food once. She even started buying her own groceries and labeling them with her name. I never told her what I did, and she never directly accused me of anything. We're still not friends, but at least now we have an understanding. When talking doesn't work, you have to get creative. I drive trucks hauling overseas containers across the country. I work for a mid-sized logistics company. My regular job is dispatch, coordinating our fleet and making sure deliveries happen on schedule. I don't usually drive anymore except when we're short-handed, which happened last Thursday when one of our regular drivers called in sick. My boss asked if I could fill in, and I agreed. The container terminal we were working with that day was one of the smaller ones, with just 2 lanes, one for driving through and one for parking to pick up or deliver containers. When I arrived, there was a bit of a backup, but nothing major. The crane operator was working his way down the line, loading and unloading containers. The driver in front of me finished and pulled away. I pulled up to take his spot, and the crane operator started lifting my container. It was clear to everyone that I was being serviced and would be done shortly. That's when this jerk in a white truck ignored all protocol. Instead of waiting his turn, he drove past me and parked his truck about 2 meters ahead of mine. This meant that once my container was loaded, I wouldn't be able to pull out. I was boxed in. Even worse, the driver in the through lane saw what was happening and didn't leave space for this guy to back up, which meant I was completely stuck. Usually the crane operators work in one direction. They go upward, finishing drivers along the way, then downward doing the same thing. They don't typically break this pattern for a single driver. I walked over to the white truck and asked the driver if he could back up since I was finished. He refused, saying he had this position and was staying put. I tried explaining that I was already done and the crane operator wouldn't be coming his way anytime soon, suggesting he could back up and even take my parking spot. He told me he might move if I begged by saying, "Pretty please." That ticked me off. This wasn't kindergarten. Plus, the terminal rules state that if your position is taken, you're supposed to pick the next available one or drive another round. This guy was parked in the driving lane, a place where he had no right to be, which was against depot rules. And he was acting like I was asking him for a favor. I don't like bothering people during work, but I wasn't going to let this slide. I pulled out my phone and called the crane operator, who I've known for years. I asked him to clear the guy in front of me so I could leave. Then I made sure he knew which truck I was talking about by describing the white truck and giving him the license plate number. I told him to make sure this guy had to unpack his camping tent, our code for making someone wait a long time. The crane operator agreed. I got my container loaded, and the path cleared for me to leave. As I drove past white truck guy, I gave him a little wave and a smile. He had no idea what was coming. Later that day, I found out we were delivering to the same customer, a big company that receives multiple containers daily. The security guard at their gate told me that white truck guy showed up more than 2 hours after me. The crane operator had made him wait until every other driver was served, leaving him at the back of a long line of trucks. The security guard said he came in stomping and cursing, complaining about the terminal. The guard just suggested that maybe next time the driver would follow the rules. I felt a little bad for delaying his delivery, but not really. He had tried to save maybe 5 minutes by cutting in line and breaking rules, and it cost him hours. I was annoyed that I had to wait a few minutes, despite being the only one there at the time. I can only imagine how this guy felt standing last in line with a dozen other trucks ahead of him. Word gets around fast in our industry. The next time I saw a white truck guy at the terminal, he followed protocol and even gave me a nod. In the trucking world, respect and following the rules keeps things moving smoothly for everyone. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.